Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sunny Gray, and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English. And we start this new edition right now. The dialogue between Venezuela's government and the opposition is set to resume in the Dominican Republic in the next few hours. After previous talks in December, both sides say important progress had been made, but that they won't be commenting further until they have a final agreement. Delegates from the government and the opposition will first meet in bilateral working groups and then with international observers on Friday. They are discussing 6 main issues to find a solution to the economic and political conflict in the country. And Juan Andres Mejia, a representative of the opposition party, Voluntad Popular, said that they will take to the streets if this new round of dialogue with Venezuelan government fails. The government has dismissed his remarks.
Is this how we want to create an atmosphere of dialogue in the Dominican Republic with these tweets of Voluntad Popular? With Mr. Mejia warning us that they will take to the streets if the negotiations fail. We say to Mejia and Voluntad Popular that they don't need to go to the Dominican Republic if they don't want to.
And our Venezuelan correspondent, Freddie Gillingham, has the latest from Caracas.
So representatives from the Venezuelan government are joining opposition members in Santo Domingo today to restart dialogue. This is the first time they're meeting in 2018 off the back of successful talks back in December 2017. Jorge Rodriguez, the communications minister of the Venezuelan government, is heading the government camp. He has expressed quite a lot of hope due to the success of the last set of talks back in December, but he has also expressed some scepticism that the dialogue could be jeopardized as a result of the deepening divisions in the opposition coalition bloc. This comes just after Tim Orteo Zambrano, a opposition negotiator who was involved in December's talks, has abandoned today and tomorrow's discussions in Santo Domingo. This is allegedly due to the fact that he said that he was being censored by the MUD. That's all we have at the moment. We will update you tomorrow on the final day of the January dialogue in the Dominican Republic. Thank you.
We thank Freddie for that update. So now let's look at how the talks with the Venezuelan opposition have developed since last September.
Last year, on September the 13th, this process started in the Dominican Republic with the first meeting between the Venezuelan government and the opposition, after President Nicolás Maduro accepted the invitation of his Dominican counterpart Danilo Medina and the Spanish government's ex-chief José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero. Afterwards, a second meeting was called on September the 27th, in which the opposition's delegates didn't show up. A month later, delegates of the Venezuelan government traveled to the Caribbean nation to affirm their commitment with dialogue. On December the 1st and the 2nd, both parties managed to sit down and talk in a new meeting, during which emerged the top of the 15. This last one gave way to today's meeting, in which there is hope for new positive agreements for Venezuela. Let's remember that this process comes after the relentless calls made by the national executive in order to channel the differences between both parties through dialogue, understanding, and peace. Around 338 members were called to have a hand in the dialogue that President Nicolás Maduro has arranged in order to achieve solutions to their disagreements.
The Foreign Minister of Ecuador has confirmed that the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, has been granted Ecuadorian citizenship. Maria Fernanda Espinosa said he had been issued with an ID in December. However, officials have not confirmed the circumstances and implications. Assange previously posted a photo of himself on Twitter wearing an Ecuadorian football shirt, adding to the speculation. The formal documentation could pave the way for him getting a passport and even diplomatic status, but The UK has said it would refuse any such request from Ecuadorian authorities. And the former CIA analyst John Kirikou says the best hope for Assange is to wait for a change of government in Britain, because the United States is putting pressure on the British authorities not to let him go.
Well, I think they're under great pressure by the American government. You know, it's the worst kept secret in Washington that Julian is likely slated to begin working his way through the U.S. judicial process if he ever leaves the embassy. And I think that the Americans have told the British under no terms should Julian be allowed to leave the embassy of his own free will and then move on. He should be snatched up and extradited to the United States.
And Peru is preparing for a day of protest against the pardon granted to the former leader, Alberto Fujimori. Demonstrations are planned in at least 11 cities across the country. The protests have been called by the families of the victims of several massacres that happened during Fujimori's time in power in the 1990s, along with trade unions and other movements. The relatives say the pardon given by President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski was illegal and denies justice for their loved ones. And the former presidential candidate of the left, Veronica Mendoza, has called on Peruvians to join the protests. On Twitter, the leader of the New Peru movement posted a video where she says, "This 11th of January, we're taking to the streets again, because we do not forget, because we do not accept acts of impunity or under-the-table negotiations, because we love our country."
Que los corruptos hagan pactos de impunidad para evadir la justicia. No aceptamos que se burlen de nosotros llamándole.
President Kuczynski has been accused of granting the pardon as part of a deal to save himself from impeachment. The protesters say the move will only reinforce impunity for human rights abusers.
In June of 2017, Fujimori was charged by the prosecutor's office as the author of the massacre of 6 campesinos in the community of Pativilca in 1992. With the new pardon, Fujimori will not be judged by the martyrs, even though he directly ordered the Colina paramilitary group to execute this operation.
The Colina group arrived at Pativilca in the early morning. They took people out of their houses and executed them on country roads. This case took a long time to go public, months and years, because the authorities did not recognize that the paramilitary group was responsible. There was a lot of confusion.
The family members of the victims of the Pativilca massacre have presented legal actions to apply for the pardon to be revoked. They argue that the measures didn't fulfill basic legal requirements, and the case should have lasted at least 24 months.
This special pardon affects the victims' rights, since the American Convention on Human Rights protects the victims and provides them access to justice, and those who are responsible for human rights crimes should be investigated and punished.
With this presidential pardon, other cases of human rights violations during Fujimori's government could go unpunished.
The massacre at the Castro Detention Center, where Alberto Fujimori was also involved, is still under investigation, as well as the crimes of forced sterilization. With this pardon, all of the investigations involving Fujimori will be closed without any kind of results.
On January the 26th, a judicial court will decide if this new legal pardon granted to Fujimori is constitutional or not. According to the upcoming decision, the former president could return to prison while his legal situation is resolved involving these humanity crimes.
We'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Protests have been called this Thursday in Brazil's largest city, Sao Paulo, against an increase in bus fares and plans to privatize part of the subway. Our correspondent, Ignacio Limas, has more.
Just happened in 2013. Public transit fares are increasing once again, and people in Sao Paulo are taking to the streets to protest this measure. The demonstrations were organized by students and the Pase Libre movement. The Sin Miedo movement, one of the biggest social and trade union movements in the city, is also joining the protest. They are opposing an increase which means Brazilians will have to pay more than $1 to take the bus in one of the most important cities of the country, an increase that the government is trying to introduce while people are enjoying the summer holiday. The groups are also denouncing a cut in the number of bus lines in Sao Paulo, a decision made by the mayor of the city, and the privatization of a second subway line. That decision was made by the governor of the state, with the support of the federal government of Michel Temer, to reduce the debt the state has with the federal government. Protesters are asking the Sao Paulo government to put a stop to this measure, arguing there are more than 14 million unemployed people in Brazil who have a hard time paying the current transport fares.
We thank Ignacio for that report. In Bolivia, the first of the measures caused by the Bolivian Workers' Confederation, the COB, to force the government to revoke the new criminal code has had little impact. Our correspondent, Freddy Morales, explains.
Economic, labor, productive, and financial activities took place as normal in the city of La Paz on the day of the strike that was called by the Bolivian Workers' Union.
Today is only a strike, without mobilizations. In the morning, we have indicated that it's at a national level, with marches with mobilizations in each department.
The reason for the calls to protest is the new criminal code. Several unions and the opposition have joined to demand their annulment.
These are demonstrations that try to generate destabilization in our democracy. But what I am seeing, for example, the demonstration and the national strike that have been announced by the transport workers has failed.
In the government, it is considered that some leaders of the workers' union, which were their partners until recently, like their senior leader, Guido Mitma, have personal interests.
This minority of leaders of the workers' union are abandoning their mission of being the representatives of the workers and the workers' interests to make conspiracy politics against our government.
The doctors started the demonstration against an article of the new criminal code, a conflict already solved. But the political opposition, along with another 10 unions, have created a Democracy Defense Committee to demand the complete annulment of the regulation.
Colombians are facing new uncertainty over the peace process in their country after President Juan Manuel Santos suspended peace talks with the ELN guerrillas that were taking place in Ecuador. More details in this report from our correspondent, Denise Herrera.
On Wednesday, Santos announced he had suspended the peace talks after hearing about the attack in the east of Colombia. It took place hours after the bilateral ceasefire expired and hours before peace talks between the government and guerrillas were expected to restart. The National Liberation Army, ELN, spoke about a resolution in 6 points after the decision of the Colombian government.
The incident
that occurred today in the east of Colombia has complicated matters. But in spite of it, the course of the peace talks must not be altered, and we have to try to find a political solution to this conflict.
The ELN launched 2 bomb attacks in the early hours against the Cano Limon oil pipeline, which is operated by Occidental Petroleum Corporation. 2 sections of the pipeline were damaged in the Arauca and Boyacá provinces. The ELN also threw a grenade at the naval base in Aruquita, in Arauca province, injuring 12 soldiers. State-owned company Ecopetrol also reported an attack in a rural area of Aguazul in the Casanare province, so President Santos decided to announce his decision on television.
I will order to our armed forces to act with force and to answer to the agreement, protect the Colombian life and honor like it's their constitutional duty.
The Colombian government had reached an agreement with ELN rebels for a bilateral ceasefire starting from October 1 of 2017 until January 9, 2018. Colombia had experienced a really difficult situation with revolutionary groups throughout their history, including groups like Revolutionary Armed Force of Colombia, the FARC, that was present in almost a third of Colombia. But the ELN has historically been a smaller group and currently has an estimate of 2,000 fighters. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Venezuelan and Netherlands authorities are due to meet on Friday to seek a solution to the problem of smuggling to the islands of Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire. Smuggled Venezuelan goods are currently freely available on Aruban store shelves. Our correspondent Madeline Garcia has the story.
On the shelves of some Aruban supermarkets, you can find smuggled Venezuelan products. This jar of mayo, for example, is dated November 11, 2017, a date when mayo could not be found in Venezuelan stores. You can also find Venezuelan tuna, which over there costs 400,000 bolivares, but here it is sold for $2. Closing the border due to contraband has also affected legal trade, such as fruit and vegetable commerce.
We have to buy American products, which are too expensive in comparison to Venezuelan products, which are also better. The entire island is affected. American products cost 3 times as much. We would pay $25 for a box of Venezuelan lemons. If we buy American, they cost between $65 and $70.
Aruba's government banned sales of uncertified copper originated from Venezuela. But copper is hardly the only issue. Gold being sold in jewelry stores in Aruba and Curacao is also part of the contraband. These topics will be discussed on Friday by the affected governments.
If there is no conversation, nothing can be resolved. It's like a disagreement between a mother and her child. The only way to resolve it is to have a conversation.
Curacao is a main gold exporter, despite the fact it possesses no gold mines. One of the main topics to be discussed on Friday is how to maintain a healthy and mutually beneficial trade relationship between both nations.
Opposition supporters in Honduras are planning more protests against electoral fraud in the coming days. This comes as human rights organizations report an increase in political killings by the army and the police.
The stories about demonstrators being killed are being repeated once again, especially in the north zone of Honduras.
When they fired the grenades, he ran away from them because he was asthmatic. Then the police started shooting at him until one of the bullets got into the left side of his chest. They grabbed him and took him into the police car. They left him there for an hour and a half, people said.
To the selected murders adds also the criminalization of human rights defenders, which assure it comes from the government.
Out of nothing, we, the human rights defenders, have been accused of many criminal offenses, especially in my case. I have been accused of being part of organized crime and drug trafficking. They say I'm also responsible for burning down some stores.
The recent assassinations in the north zone of Honduras were performed by hitmen. The victims are people associated to the opposition, like the case of Santos Alvarado, who has been killed in the last hours in San Pedro Sula.
This is no coincidence, because these assassinations happen in the cities where there are more resistance and more demands being made through peaceful demonstrations. We're talking about San Pedro Sula and all its municipalities.
For the defenders, the police and the army, their acts are arbitrary, planning for people to stop demonstrating, especially on the strike plan on January the 20th.
Mire, para empezar, ni siquiera deberían estar con pasamontañas.
For starters, they shouldn't wear ski masks. They should be identified with their badges, with their names on it. They shouldn't perform any searches without a warrant. We are facing completely arbitrary behavior by the military and police, who want to impose fear and terror.
Quiere imponer a toda costa es el miedo y el terror.
Some reporters say that some 31 people have been killed so far during the protests. More than 50 have been injured by military bullets, and more than 100 people have been incarcerated.
Puerto Rico's Director of Tourism, Jose Izquierdo, has been removed from office after being accused of sexual harassment. As announced in December 2017, Izquierdo allegedly harassed several female colleagues while in office. The Secretary of the Governorship, William Villafañe, asked for his removal, saying he can no longer be trusted. And one issue facing the Pope when he arrives in Chile next week is his appointment of a bishop in Osorno who has been accused of protecting an alleged pedophile. Protesters in Chile say they will demonstrate every day of the pontiff's visit because he hasn't done enough to root out sexual abuse. Pope Francis has defended the bishop, saying allegations that he covered up sexual abuses are unfounded. Authorities in Chile have detected a 40-meter crack in the crater of a Chilean volcano, raising alarm in nearby communities and particularly among specialists who are permanently monitoring its activity. Flyovers and cameras set up at the Chilean volcano have documented incandescent displays of rocks associated with minor explosions. Officials fear this kind of activity could eventually lead to a major eruption. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. Let's have a look at some of the other stories from around the world.
US President Donald Trump has expressed openness to the possibility of US talks with North Korea, but said he is unclear if that would be rewarding.
I just spoke to President Moon. He's very thankful for what we've done. They're having talks with North Korea. We'll see how that happens. Who knows where it leads? Hopefully it'll lead to success for the world, not just for our country, but for the world. And we'll be seeing over the next number of weeks and months what happens.
In Pakistan, 2 civilians have been killed in a protest over the rape and murder of a 7-year-old girl, Zainab Ansari, whose body was found from a garage dumpsters in the town of Kasur in eastern Pakistan. The protests sparked by her death turned violent, and the police fired live rounds to disperse crowds, which killed the 2 protesters.
We are not going to bury our child until the issue has been properly resolved. We are going to appeal to the Chief Justice of Pakistan and to the Army Chief of Pakistan that everyone has daughters. And if there is any humanity, they should take suo motu action immediately.
2 Reuters news agencies journalists have been charged in Myanmar with obtaining state secrets. The reporters Yu Wa Lon and Yu Ka So U have been accused of violating the Official Secrets Act, a law dating to the British colonial period that carries a maximum punishment of 14 years in prison. Tunisian police have arrested 237 people for attacking police stations, government buildings and vandalism during anti-government protests. Clashes spread out to more than 20 towns across the country as people protest against new tax and price increases imposed by the government on 1st of January. Armed robbers have run away with several millions of euros worth of jewellery after smashing the windows of the world-famous Ritz Hotel in Paris. 5 men armed with axes smashed the windows of the ground floor of the hotel and stole a valuable jewellery display. 3 of the gang members were detained while fleeing the scene, and 2 suspects are still on the run.
3 more Catalan leaders are waiting on the Spanish Supreme Court to decide on their continued imprisonment. Our correspondent, Joan Ortiz, has the details from Barcelona.
¿Qué tal, compañeros? Saludos.
The Catalan territory is paying attention to what is happening at the Spanish Supreme Tribunal, although there is a possibility that they will not decide today on the preventive measures against Jordi Sánchez, Jordi Cuixart, and Joaquín Forn. The separatist parties that they belong to are not very hopeful about their release. This afternoon, the defense of the 3 in jail will formally present a petition to have them freed, but the decision is in the prosecution's hands. We know that the prosecution has demanded that the 3 who are accused of sedition respect the Constitution. Oriol Junqueras, leader of Esquerra Republicana, who is also in jail, testified at the Supreme Tribunal last week, but his arguments were rejected by the court since the prosecution considered the Catalan leader will again commit the same offenses he is being accused of. We will have to wait for the court's decision.
We thank Joan Ortiz for that report. Today marks the 16th anniversary of the opening of the United States Guantanamo prison, a facility established to hold detainees swept up during former President George W. Bush's so-called war on terror.
In response to the 9/11 attacks in 2001 and subsequent military operations by the United States in Afghanistan, existing migrant detention facilities at Guantanamo were repurposed as an offshore prison for captives in the war on terror. It was intentionally established on a U.S. naval base on the tip of Cuba that George W. Bush's lawyers argued was beyond the reach of U.S. law, which means detainees could be denied legal protection.
They are inherently unfair. They are set up to be a second-class system of justice. So I think that they are inherently flawed and will not deliver fairness for either side.
Shortly after his inauguration in 2009, President Barack Obama signed an executive order to close the facility. But even at the end of his term in 2017, Guantanamo remained in operation.
I continue to believe that Guantanamo is a recruitment tool for terrorist organizations, that it clouds and sours some of the counterterrorism cooperation that we need to engage in. And it's not necessary, and it's hugely expensive for U.S. taxpayers.
Although authorities claim prisoners were held in humane conditions, reports surfaced showing quite the opposite. There were accounts of intense torture and sexual humiliation, pushing dozens of prisoners to suicide. Kako, an Afghan prisoner who was recently released from Guantanamo, recounts the horrors he faced.
This prison is changing the minds of people like my friend from the prison and many more. This prison is the worst place, and I think it is better to shut it down. To stabilize those who were released from Guantanamo, there should be a compensation for them.
Despite a loud campaign by legal activists and scholars, the Bush administration insisted that prisoners were not eligible to be tried by the normal channels used by civilian and military courts. However, after much outcry, in 2008, the United States Supreme Court ruled that detainees had the right of access to federal courts. Still, lawyers for Guantanamo inmates say the ruling came a little too late.
Issues like the kind of physical inhumanity and abuse that existed in the earlier years, I think for the majority of the men now, is not really the main problem. It is the condition of, after over 12 years of detention without charge, still not knowing whether or if you are going home.
At the height of the so-called war on terror, Guantanamo held as many as 780 prisoners. The Bush administration transferred over 500 detainees out of the prison, while the Obama administration moved almost 200 inmates. Today, 41 prisoners still remain, not knowing if they will ever see freedom or their families.
The death toll from devastating mudslides in affluent communities along a stretch of Southern California coastline has risen to 17. Hundreds of rescuers are searching the wreckage for missing people after the deadly mudslides. More than 100 homes were destroyed, and another 300 have been damaged. More than 50 people have been rescued already, but many places were still inaccessible as several roads are closed. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesiotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesio English, I'm Sweeney Gray. Thank you for watching.